This program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hey everybody, welcome back to WatchMojo and the Inside Mojo podcast, where each week we talk about another key moment in WatchMojo's 20-year history on YouTube. I'm your host, Rob. With me, as always, WatchMojo CEO and co-founder, Ashkan Karbasfrooshan. Happy first day of spring, Ash.
Yeah, thank you. Also, Persian Iranian New Year, which coincides with the spring, the beginning of spring. So that's
yes,
nice.
And I did notice that we recently put out a list of the top 10 most influential Iranians, which if anybody has seen that and thought that it was a little bit of a left field video for us to do, you can thank Ash for coming up with that idea.
Yeah, last year I mustered the courage to finally do a related video on the Iran or ancient Persia, and we did incredible inventions. And, you know, it's like one of the first nations. It's the oldest nation in the world, going back to 3,200 before Christ. So Iranians invented everything from air conditioning to, you know, the human rights was kind of first coined in the Cyrus's cylinder, many other things. And that was kind of very tame. And knowing me, I kind of this year was like, let's do something that's going to be a bit more thorny. So we did influential Iranians, but we didn't want to just like leave it to, you know, rulers, leaders, kings, shahs, supreme leaders. So we included poets, mathematicians, doctors. I know, again, most people seem to like it. I mean, it's interesting. YouTube used to be viewed as like the armpit of the internet, a cesspool where it's like you could pick a fight over everything. But it's changed. And, you know, this year, the whole message from YouTube and analysts is that YouTube is the new television. So it's like, you know, the community was rather positive. But then, like on X, formerly known as Twitter, understandably, you get, here we go. Understandably, you get a lot more activists and advocates who are rather critical of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the regime that has been in power since 79, when that gentleman, Ayatollah Khomeini, seized power. And so obviously, you know, many did not like that Khomeini was chosen as influential, even though he was ranked 9th. But as I said, I go, if we would have done like top 10 influential figures of the 20th century, I think Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong would be all in it. So
influential for the wrong reasons, but influential nonetheless.
I mean, it's like I always look at as their net impact. And so, but at the same time, I was surprised that those who objected to Khomeini being included didn't notice that, you know, you had both Reza Shah Pahlavi, Mohammad Reza, his son Pahlavi. So, you know, but they did also influence the country. And I tried to be, I mean, the research, we kind of researched a lot. But yeah, I mean, you know, so this is number 9 and good list, fun. I mean, these are the ones I like more, frankly. I've always really been into history. There you go. And so, yeah, no, it was fun. Most people liked it. And I even did like, who said influencing was easy, because anytime you do anything really, you know, we have to be masochists to pick.
Yes. There you go.
This, by the way, was
like you're on like the dollar bill or something.
This, I think that's my passport. So already I'm like, how did a colleague get my passport, which is a bit troubling. It was like a Mossad move, because I know our colleague who did it. So maybe that's how he accessed it. I could make these jokes. I'm an atheist, and, you know. And so it's funny because my mom, and then we'll get to the show, my mom is from a city in Iran that is the birthplace of Esther and I think Mordecai, who were Jewish Iranians going back many, many years. And so when I did my DNA test, not surprisingly, you know, I have some family, like 2nd or 3rd degree, who have Jewish ancestry, and that's normal. I mean, it's like in Iran, it's quite a melting pot. And so my daughters were like, oh my God, if you basically can point to having like Jewish DNA, and even if it's like 0.01%, they're like, then you're going to give yourself carte blanche to criticize Muslims, criticize Jewish people. I'm like, all I need is some black DNA, and then we're set. Then I can just say whatever.
The entire world is your.
There you go. I'm like Chris Rock. Anyway, so it was a good list. I had a ton of fun doing it, and but I also understand why people might have been a bit sensitive with some of the picks, but that's their problem, but I took the time to explain it. Anyway,
people being sensitive on the internet, I've never heard.
I know.
Have I also understood that you are starting up some sort of school or something? I witnessed some post that you made. Tell us a little bit about that.
No, I'm not starting a school right away. I've always been, obviously I care about education quite a bit. I taught, being a writer and all that. I can't lie. I'll be candid. So I had an academic institution here ask me to support them, which I'm always open to. But when I kind of looked at what they were asking for, I was like, you could do this and then kind of have to navigate the policy, politics, protocol people of this very, traditional establishment. But I was like, you could also in a few years just start to talk to people, plant the seeds, and really focus on like a very small kind of academy for, imagine what we call CJEP and university, so college aged. Yeah. There's like, if you're an entrepreneur, I don't really think you need to take the traditional path. And when you are really, really driven and you have a lot of stamina, when you're around students who really are just coasting, dialing it in, could care less, I realize it's not even the right environment for you, even though it's very representative of the world where you have followers. But there's a difference between people who are like committed to their work, but not necessarily entrepreneurial, but still have good intentions. And we have a ton of those people on the team, and we need those, versus those who really are like a drag. So I was like, I could probably just set up something where, you have two tracks, one that's more entrepreneurial for technology founders, and one that's more for storytellers, who now with everything we talk on the show, the democratization of media, the no barriers to entry. And so it was more as I was considering their proposal, as I'm prone to do, I put this feeler out and I said, ultimately, I just need somebody that knows the administration of an academic organization who would be able to help me figure out which licenses to get, what permits to get. And I would be a teacher. I would be like an advisor, and I would recruit. And the idea would be, most of the teachers here would have to be entrepreneurial. Doesn't mean that they had to have started something that became successful. But to me, it's always jarring. I was speaking in a classroom and I just said, I alluded to product market fit. And I just stopped, like, you guys have heard that. Not a single hand went up. I was going to burn down the classroom. I was like, you guys, what are you doing? Like, it's a trite term, but it's a term you should know by 2025. So at that point, I was like, yeah, screw it. I'm like, why am I going to get involved again with a bunch of people that I project to be this and that? I was like, I could just do my own thing, which by the age of 47 should be blazingly clear that is the way I should operate. But I'm not starting it tomorrow. It's just something that I've always considered.
Cool. Well, sign me up. I think it should be interesting. So let's get into the subject of today's episode. We're talking about MsMojo and what you referred to as the dawn of the woke era on YouTube. So let's talk about that a little bit. How do you define that when you say the woke era?
So again, fair, great question. I definitely don't want to come here and be like, woke is BS. And like, let's just go back to the origins. I think like anything else, at the root, at the onset, originally, there was a reason why even the concept of woke came up. I remember publications like Mike and even BuzzFeed and others kind of like pushing that. And the idea was just to be alert, to be awake, awoken, to be aware of both historical, socioeconomic, sociological, anthropology, economic issues, political issues that explain the malaise, the kind of frictions. We'll talk about American society, which start off with a history of slavery, a history of genocide against Native Americans. But I then go, let's hold on there, because Native Americans actually came from somewhere else and they were killing each other like pros. And so we seem to object, but frankly, they were no different. They were also doing exactly what the bad whites from Europe did. So what's your hypocrisy, right? So I'm like, again, Chris Rock is like, Ash, calm down. Like, you're offending everybody now too much. So as much as, I think a country that started off with slavery and never originally got, let's say, the acres and, I forgot in my interview with Spike Lee, but it was like they were all promised, land to get a friend. Like, okay, there's a lot of injustice that's rooted in American history, but I think like anything else, the 2010s just went to an extreme. So everything, even if it has merit, like I believe in climate change, but when it gets weaponized, then you go, hold on, this seems a bit like BS, or now, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The things at the root of like the woke movement, like just justice, fairness, equality, I've always believed in, and it was kind of principles of WatchMojo. But the whole DEI became a joke because, one, a bit like innovation, you can't just silo it and be like, I'm in charge of DEI. Who is you? Who is you? Let me guess, you're a Black or a lesbian or just somebody that it's comical that some senior manager basically hired and put you in a corner without really giving you any power. So the entire premise of how this went about is faulty. You don't realize it. You're being set up to fail. It's a fad, and you're seeing it now. So when I criticize DEI, I'm not actually criticizing the tenets of justice. I'm criticizing the overall bullshitness of these corporations that are fickle, solely in the pursuit of profit, zero principles, and you see it, right? But so I think that's, now to bring it back to WatchMojo, we are ultimately a curator. We are ultimately a tastemaker. We are ultimately, summarizing information and making it entertaining, so to speak. So I always go, you want to be sensitive and aware of sociological trends and changes. But yeah, you don't want to just be like, fad du jour. And, I've always said, specifically with like DEI and the whole woke stuff, it was, you had to really just have an open mind, an open heart, an open spirit to listen to people you disagree with. So personally, the reason why I found the whole DEI woke stuff a bit caricature-esque is because the people that were promoting it were the most closed-minded people that I encounter in business. Like, I'm very open to any idea. I like to listen to people that have very different points of view. There's nuggets of what they say that make sense. But I was like, man, these are the most closed-minded mofos ever. I don't like, these people can't be taken seriously. There's no compromise. There's no empathy. It's just my way or the highway, or you're a racist or a sexist or a bigot. And I'm like, you know what? Wrap it up. Go fuck off. You're wasting everybody's time and you're not taken seriously. And you see it now. I laugh every time I see a corporation scale back DEI because they were never serious about it to begin with.
Yeah, we are starting to see a shift back to the median, I think, in some ways right now. How did all of this back in 2016 influence the decision to start a channel like MsMojo, which is catered more towards a female audience? And while you answer that, maybe we can queue up a clip that we have on the very first video on the MsMojo channel.
Let's do it. Yeah. So I'm assuming there's no audio and I could chat. Yeah. And this is like a weird first one because MsMojo was actually going to be entertainment. So I'm a bit befuddled, although sometimes the first video we publish isn't, there's not like a big method to the madness. It might have been a practical reason. But so here's the truth. 2005-06, when I kind of had the first business plan. Okay, this might have been from our topic series where we showcased other channels. Yeah, so that's the context.
So this is a rebrand from the WatchMojo channel.
Yeah, no, so we started off this thing called topics, but it was TOPX, Roman numeral 10. Okay. And it was like topics of interest. But the idea was to showcase other channels. So we would want it to, the same way we were curating Hollywood, movies and songs and games, we wanted to showcase other channels. So we started off with workouts. But setting that aside. So in the original business plan of WatchMojo, I always had like editions for, we'll call it, men 18 to 34, women 18 to 34, kids, yada, yada. I mean, look, I wanted to, if we had the right editorial, we've been approached to basically have like, people say this, our Black viewers, they're like, why don't you have Black Mojo? I'm like, I ain't going to do Black Mojo. I'm like, if you want to partner and come as an editorial lead, we could consider it so long as it makes sense. And the question of whether it makes sense or not is a whole other question. Like, does a Canadian edition of WatchMojo make sense? Maybe, but I don't know, We even, I think, had the Queer Mojo URL because I was like, that might make sense. I could see how that demo might want its own brand. But in any case, I had an idea to serve. Our statement of purpose is here to serve. So I always had this desire to kind of have positive communities serving fans of things that they're interested about, whether it was hobbies, activities, franchises. And it was becoming abundantly clear that you kind of, as a storyteller, you do tell the stories you know and you're passionate about. So we started off covering, again, I always joke, Seinfeld, Ozzy Osbourne, et cetera, et cetera. And it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that the content that I was greenlighting and recommending, and then ultimately the team would recommend, was all male franchises, for lack of a better word. Star Wars, yes, there's a lot of women that love Star Wars, Star Trek, Batman, but the demo is what it is. It's predominantly male. And so if ever, like, let's say I was like, hey, you know what, like One Direction may not be my cup of tea, but there's a lot of fans out there. They got some good music. Why don't we cover it? It was pretty clear. Or Glee. You know, like Glee was a very popular show, not my cup of tea. I loved Sex and the City, but even I knew that, like, if you put Sex on the City on WatchMojo, the hardcore gamer fan who's watching Call of Duty or a top 10 Megadeth track, if all of a sudden they see top 10, you know, reasons why Samantha is queen, or top 10 reasons why One Direction is the next Rolling Stones, which they're not, but they were very talented. I was like, this is not going to be a fun community. It's not going to be a fun experience. If you're a fan of these people or groups, you know, if you go in the comment section, if you have some guy who's like shitting on you for liking Justin Bieber, I was like, yeah, I don't really see that being good. So for me, it was all about putting myself in the shoes of the viewer, the user experience. But yeah, it was a lot of noise. People were like, you're sexist, you're gendering. And I knew these people were, I want to choose my words carefully, juvenile, inexperienced, immature, morons, you know, but at the same time, it was the era and people wanted just the big free for all. People were just like, anything goes, anything comes. And I was like, yeah, you're kind of an idiot because, you know, if let's say if at the time I had an 8-year-old girl who was on YouTube and she would go watch, you know, top 10 victorious moments. Yeah, guess what? There's a guy who's going to make some inappropriate comment about, you know, Ariana Grande and what he would love to do to her type of thing. And I was like, that's not what we're trying to build, right? Yep. In any case.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense when you talk about like building a better community or serving the audience in a better way. It makes a lot of sense to have a dedicated channel for people who like those types of things. We should be putting up a poll on the WatchMojo YouTube page. We want to know, aside from the WatchMojo channel itself, what is your other favorite Mojo channel? Is it MsMojo, WatchMojo UK, Unveiled, Mojo Plays, or is there another one? We only can provide 4 options. So if there's another one that you like,
that's slander against context. No, I'm kidding.
Leave it down in the comments and let us know. We'll revisit that towards the end of the podcast.
What's your favorite channel? What's your favorite other non-WatchMojo channel?
Espanol.
Are you serious?
No. So just because I saw Yvonne write that in the chat there. Just wanted to represent Espanol for a second. I'd have to say Mojo Plays because that's the one that I've been working on since I got hired. So
you're so self-centered. No, I'm joking. So I like, I personally always have fancied, no, not Context, Mojo Travels. I did enjoy Mojo Travels. There's so much more that I feel that could have become. COVID obviously curtailed its trajectory. But I would say probably after WatchMojo. I mean, I like MsMojo quite a bit, but MsMojo, when it started, I think the topics were more in my sandbox of things that I like that surprised some people. But now, obviously, it's gone much more, you know, deep, niche. Anyway, but yeah, so I would probably say if I wasn't like the editorial lead on Context, which at best is on semi-retirement right now, I like, obviously, entrepreneurship and all of that stuff. But because I'm kind of biased, I would recuse myself and go with Travels.
That's fair. We have a special guest to bring in. Today, Emily Brayton will be joining us. She is a longtime WatchMojo employee and has been with MsMojo since the very beginning. Welcome to the show, Emily. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm good. I was lurking and I was waiting for MsMojo to come up as one of your favorite channels, either of you. So you failed the test. I'm kidding.
Good point. This tells you how much we practice this. Anyway.
Yeah, so we have another clip, which is the first MsMojo video to hit 1 million views. So maybe we can check that out. And while that's being pulled up, maybe Emily can give us a little insight. Oh, this one's going up with audio. Okay, never mind. False alarm. In terms of the audience, how have you noticed it being similar and different to the WatchMojo audience, Emily?
Well, I mean, just coming from a person who greenlights the topics and stuff like that, it has been interesting what common ground both WatchMojo and MsMojo have, and then how MsMojo could cover the topic differently, whether it's a different character we spotlight or a different sort of like more emotional moments as opposed to action moments of a particular franchise or something like that. And that's been kind of finding out our niche. But then there's also obviously certain demos, like animation is a huge thing for us. Broadway is a huge thing for us. Those are sorts of things that WatchMojo dipped its toe in, certainly before MsMojo's existence, but ever since it's kind of been our wheelhouse. Maybe that's my fault. Probably is.
I have a question. How do
Sure.
you avoid the accusation of pandering, or like what I was accused of, like the gendering, the stereotyping? Even me, I feel bad that the example I always give is, and I like One Direction. I like Justin Bieber, you know, for what that genre is. I like everything. Love Sex and the City. So I'm not like, it's not a knock, but I understood the criticism. Like, oh, let me guess, everything's going to be pink. And I was like, you know, I didn't choose the colors. It was the, you know, but how do you address that? Like, do you think it's fair, or is it?
I mean, if you're doing something right, there are always going to be critics. That is kind of the rule of the world. But I do think we come from a place of we're as big fans of the stuff we're talking about as anybody else. So it's very genuine. And I mean, it's just speaking on like Taylor Swift, for instance, because we published a video on her yesterday, like huge fan of hers myself. So I know what personally I would like to see. So it comes from a place of, hey, going and watching all of the Eras Tour like live streams of somebody at the concert, it's grainy and stuff like that, does give a certain amount of authority to say, I'm a fan, this is for you as a fan, and it's coming from not a place of conflict or trying to incense the audience. And it just happens that certain topics might be able to live both on MsMojo and WatchMojo. We definitely have weekly discussions. Like Rob and I, for instance, have a weekly discussion about what might fit better on MsMojo. We're both covering Snow White this week, both in very different ways.
I'm very curious, what is the way on WatchMojo and what is the way on MsMojo?
Well, I can speak to the WatchMojo side that it's a little bit probably more critical than the MsMojo side, to put it mildly. But yeah.
Yes, and ours is differences between the animated version and the live action version.
So you know what you just said as an example, I think captures a lot of both our little world, YouTube, really what's happening in America and the world. So when Trump was running this time, I said it's his election to lose. And when people were like, why do you say that? Do you like him? I'm like, no, I don't like him. The guy's a felon. He has no, you know, positive characteristics of principle, loyalty, or those things. I go, but he is, because of Mark Burnett, what people assume to be a successful person. They don't view Kamala as a leader, rightfully or wrongfully. They view him. I'm like, I'm the weatherman. I'm just telling you what I see as the weather. I'm not saying I like rain or I like snow. But I did say that 2020, this is the point I want to make. I go, 2026 is going to be America's 250-year birthday. And I go, there's always a regression to the mean where like Clinton was the opposite of Bush Papa. And then Bush son was the opposite of Clinton. Obama was the opposite of Bush. And you see where I'm going. Like there's always like a regression, Trump versus Obama, Biden versus Trump. So I was like, I don't think that Americans really want to have another 4 years of kicking themselves and being like apologetic about what it is to be American. And I think that people wanted to kind of celebrate America. And that's why they went with Trump. This was the spirit of, and I'm not saying I agree with all of that, but I'm just saying that is the way, that was my read. So for me, it was about celebrating franchises. Even early on when we used to do like top 10 artists who are hated, it wasn't mean. You know, like we would cover Justin Bieber as top 10 reasons why Justin Bieber is hated, but it was like I would tell the team it should be more of a roast. It should have that kind of feel where we're still kind of like celebrating them, but making fun of them, right? So for me early on, that was the idea. And hearing you, I kind of was like a father that's like, oh wow, the kid grew up to kind of what you wanted. That was the point. I think it's totally fine and fair for WatchMojo's editorial to say, hey, what were you thinking, Disney? You cast an actress in this role who clearly is antagonistic with everything that this brand and this character, let's say, represents, at least in media interviews and all that. What were you thinking? How do you think this is going to help the franchise? And how do you think the fans are going to react? But we still, I understand from MsMojo, then that gives us the ability to kind of cover both angles. The fans that kind of don't care about the noise and the politics behind, so they get kind of almost like just a nostalgic to now. But then WatchMojo could kind of get there a bit more in your face, a bit more rah, and it kind of gave us that optionality. So hearing this example, again, I'm like, wow, I understand why early on people were a bit critical, but it kind of the recipe worked. The ingredients all came together. And do you feel that? Sorry, Rob, you're going to say?
No, I was going to move on to something else.
Well, you feel, and I want the truth. I don't want you to tell me what you think I want to hear. But do you think MsMojo makes more sense in 2015, 16, or in 2025?
2025, absolutely.
Your job security does not depend.
Yeah.
on it.
Okay, great, cool.
Nope.
I needed it said plain and simple. Yeah, I think honestly, as just a person walking through the world, we can have healthy discussions, disagreements, stuff like that. But sometimes after a hard day at work, you just want to watch something about something you like. And that's what MsMojo is very much trying, succeeding in some cases, maybe needing to improve in others, what we're doing. So
yeah, I mean, what I always try to challenge the MsMojo team, and there's a lot of overlap. Like there's people who work on both. It's not that siloed at all. Although the teams do a very good job of keeping each brand true to their editorial kind of beacon. So on that, it's like the best of both worlds. But yeah, I mean, I always viewed it as, you had Time Magazine, like that's the WatchMojo, and then you had People, and that's the MsMojo, which actually became even bigger. In many ways, the most successful. I didn't know this, but when I was researching Time like a decade ago and reading the book from its founder, People was probably the most successful magazine of all time. And so I've always challenged the team. I'm like, I don't say you guys or gals, but I mean, you folks. I'm like, there's no reason why MsMojo needs to ever live in the shadow of a WatchMojo. Like we could have called it anything. It's just the team originally voted for MsMojo, and I was like, yeah, I love it. But I do think that the runway of MsMojo is so much bigger, and so yeah, no, it's an exciting kind of property to have. And each year when we start off, I tell the team, I'm like, do you have what you need to succeed? Do you have what you need to do? What is the line I say? Do you have what you need to do what you want to do, basically? Anyway, Rob, I hijacked the conversation.
So this whole podcast is kind of revolving around WatchMojo's 20th anniversary, but MsMojo will actually be celebrating their 10th anniversary next year. And so it's had quite a storied history as well. What's the evolution of the content and the channel been like over the past 9 years now?
Well, we've definitely delved into very weird territory sometimes. That is me copping to that. Having more ranking all of the Disney Renaissance movies on camera. If you ever watch that, you will get a sense of my love for Disney, but probably my inability to deal with conflict and disagreement. And we started off doing stuff that it was specifically catered to a female demographic, trying out to see if the niche on YouTube was telling people what YouTube videos to watch, or to highlight girl bands in television. I think those are actually the first 2 videos we ever did, but now we're highlighting, covering the Met Gala and the Oscars the day after by covering the best red carpet looks, which is much like you said, kind of going in the People magazine, that sort of coverage. That's definitely evolved. We didn't always do that. But we did have a couple of versions of us on camera talking about the looks at the MTV VMAs and stuff like that. So it's evolving, and as people want something different from their YouTube videos, people wanting more on camera or wanting longer form, that's something that we're obviously trying to respond to as we notice the trends and as we notice what we ourselves want to watch when we're not working. So those are a couple of the things. But it's like a constantly evolving thing. If somebody comes into a meeting come Monday and says, I really like this show, we're going to have a chat about it and see why you like it, and then honestly cover that angle. Because
do you view MsMojo as having to stay in that lane of movies, TV shows, or, you know, because WatchMojo, we have that, not struggle, but like that conversation. Do you think MsMojo, stereotypically, because historically you also have lifestyle and travel in women's publications, but YouTube is very niche, so it doesn't really make sense either. But do you feel that like MsMojo has more permission to branch out, or are you like, no, if you had your way, you would keep MsMojo really, really focused on movies and, you know, fandom less than communities of other stuff?
I mean, we've definitely tried to make them hybrids, where a couple of newer series we've worked on are how historical figures have been represented in media. So there is coupling how Cleopatra, how you might study her in a history class, but then also how she's been portrayed by Elizabeth Taylor and on the show Rome and all of those things. So it doesn't seem dissonant to what our regularly scheduled programming is, but it covers more into the history camp of things. That's definitely something that we have dipped our toe in, are aiming to do more of. We resurrected the Mojo Notes series. That was kind of the Cliff's Notes that WatchMojo did several years ago. Yeah, we are attempting to figure out what people like in travel videos as well. Like getting Mojo Travels a little bit back on the ground, but through MsMojo. Thought you'd be happy to hear that. So yeah.
Motion. So I have a question for you. Tell me if you're like, this is crazy, Ash, keep it to yourself, or you're like, I get it. So my daughter's really good at volleyball. So as I was sitting there once, I was like, such a passionate sport. Fans, you know, the parents go crazy. And then obviously I know there was a Netflix show, I think, about the Nebraska team or whatever. Long story short. So I was like, I want to just organize some tournament and just invite a bunch of teams, a bit random, from different schools in New England, Ontario, Quebec, the province, state where we're in. And just whatever, MsMojo could be a sponsor, you know, because 10 years ago, one of my buddies was like, my daughter is going to a cheer competition. It was like a couple $100. I was like, yeah, I'm not sure if WatchMojo is the right brand to be like sponsoring a bunch of teenage girls. Like, it just, if you think about it, if I walk in a meeting and I'm like, I want to organize a volleyball for teenagers, you'd be like, Ash, we're calling the FBI. That looks a bit weird, but it's my daughter, right? And so I was like, okay, but if I came to you and said, I think that could be good for visibility, it's a good cause, you know, my daughter's, you know, I'm super into it myself. I used to play volleyball. And so are you like, yeah, that doesn't make sense because it's not movies or TV? Or are you like, no, we kind of get it. Like, how do you view the brand?
No, that does make sense. I mean, I can speak more to hockey games and stuff like that. Watching that sponsorship is a useful way to kind of show what you believe in. Even if it's not necessarily we're going to do like best volleyball teams of whatever section. But yeah, like I do think that it kind of represents the openness. And, like,
we sponsored the Islanders of the NHL, so it was just visibility. All right, that might be on a later show. Rob's like, note to self: we're doing a volleyball tournament. Maybe.
I don't have the height for volleyball, so don't count me in for that one.
I don't have the hand-eye coordination, so don't do that for me.
I didn't think you guys would be on the field, but anyway.
Good.
I was picturing a WatchMojo volleyball team competing against
we had a soccer
maybe
team
high schoolers. Maybe we could compete against high schoolers.
Maybe
might have a chance.
That might be the only time we win. Yeah, I'm kidding.
MsMojo has also been kind of a pioneer for the WatchMojo brand in some ways. Shorts come to mind in that MsMojo was one of the first channels, the first channel to have big success with shorts. So are there any other ways that you feel MsMojo has kind of like led the way in terms of editorial for the whole company?
Yeah. I mean, there's angles of lists that we have brought to the fore. The 5 and 5. So if ever you have like 5 good and then 5 trash, those were started on the MsMojo side of things.
It sounds like my birthday card for my kids. I'm kidding.
Oh no.
Kidding. Joke. It's just 5 negative.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
Okay. But I mean, regarding shorts, while the format of it is the same for both, I think MsMojo has been really good at making it still matter that it's a video and not just a still image of a particular topic. So there's still some semblance of storytelling or information being imparted. So that's been like a huge conversation with both sides when making shorts, because I think it can be easy to just be like, okay, we're going to go show a side by side when there's yet another remake of a beloved 80s property. But can that just have been a still? Could this have just been an email? You know, I think that is why our approach has been really successful. Like, it's not something we want to keep hidden from everybody else. So there's that.
Is the community still that much? I love it. Is the community still as positive as it was? Like, I remember a decade ago.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's really positive. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So it's an anomaly of the web. It's like, social scientists are going to study this, like in ancient, I mean, in the future, they'll be like, in the ancient times, in the year 2000, there was this little community that was positive. That was not toxic and negative. The MsMojo, it's like Pompeii, anyway.
I hope it's not like Pompeii.
I hope it's not like Pompeii. Yeah, that I agree for sure. I'm kidding.
So what's the future looking like for MsMojo? Where do you predict it going over the next few years?
Well, I think we're veering more into essay style, longer form. We've done a few iceberg related videos this year. So we did reality TV, for instance, delving into the seedy underbelly past the cursory surface level stuff that one might know about reality TV. So I think we're experimenting with seeing us a lot more on camera, having each entry be a recommendation of a particular staff member. It's honestly in an age of anonymity, and you just shoot the thing into ChatGPT and call it a day. There is also a reaction to, you want to see more of the messiness, more of the humanity that's behind all of the stuff that's being worked on and put on the internet. So yeah, longer form, more on camera.
Your first, just that point, our first topic, we did the video on influential Iranians. And then when I actually expanded, I mean, that was a bit more representative in that I was a bit more setting up some guardrails. Like, usually there's a whole team researching and I'm not even involved, which is fine. You guys do a great job. But when I actually explained the method to the madness of like why we included poets and not just like military people, but also how like we thought of like, the mathematician versus the author, who was more influential, or like the prophet versus the original king. I did get a few emails. People were like, oh, okay, that's really helpful, interesting. So people do want that. And that's why behind the scenes has always worked. I have a question, and not to put you on the spot, but like, again, like I'm a student of media history and all that. And so like on average, if you were to take Fortune or WatchMojo, any kind of like mainstream-ish brand, you're going to get like a representative, like, 60-40 male or female, depending on what it is. And you're going to get maybe 10% LGBTQ readership. It's pretty constant, like, of course, if you're like Gay Magazine, you might have 90% LGBT, but like most publications. So when we had WatchMojo early on, I would detect that the percentage was 10, 15%, nothing outlier. Would you agree that MsMojo has a higher percentage of LGBTQ viewers? Yeah, that was always the case. Okay, so how do you navigate that? Where, again, you don't want to pander. You're aware that there's this bigger constituency. You could also eventually branch out and have, you know, we didn't use Queer Mojo wisely. We used not Glow. Was it Glow? What was we had a channel on Snap.
It was Mojo Glow, I
It was
believe.
Mojo Glow. Okay, there you go. So okay. So my point was we did dip our toes in that, but how do you like think of that when you're doing a list, whether it's not so much representation in a bad way like a checklist, but where you're like, you know, if you're doing, sorry to be super stereotypical, but if you're doing sassy characters, you know, there's certain characters who may or may not be gay that you include, but knowing that you have this bigger readership, I'm just curious, how do you guys navigate that?
Well, I mean, it does depend on the actual IP or like show we're covering, because that definitely factors in. We cover RuPaul's Drag Race to the point that drag queens who were featured on the show say that they're fans of ours. So, I mean, I hope that speaks for itself, that it comes from a genuine place. And even if it's playful ribbing, which if you've ever watched RuPaul's Drag Race, they do. So that's an aspect of it. I mean, like in the sassy example, there are multiple discussions behind the scenes of deconstructing what do we mean when we say sassy? What do we mean when we have a particular angle that we're discussing? Are we accidentally backing ourselves into a stereotype corner? So having that discussion is healthy. And then we just pick best, for instance, as an adjective. But yeah, I think the way of not pandering is having a very frank conversation. There are members of the LGBTQIA plus community who work with me on MsMojo topics as well. So it's, you know, a question of sitting back, listening, as it is with anything else, just assessing.
Yeah, an area I've struggled when I get, and these are usually industry people who've become friends over the years, so they're not just like an industry ad exec or publisher, who happen to be, whether they're Black, whether they're gay, lesbian, whatever, and they ask me, they're like, why don't you actually then have it? And I'm like, okay, you're coming from a good place suggesting this, but I'm like, you know, the instant we would do that, we would get a lot of heat. So I'm like, you also need the right voice. And I'm like, you know, I'm not, you know, I may be empathetic to certain concerns and priorities and whatever causes, but I'm like, I can't pretend to be that person. So yeah, but yeah, MsMojo, I always kind of felt that was a bigger kind of segment of the viewership, and just was curious how you guys navigated. Okay. In good hands.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for the insights. It's great to see how far MsMojo has come and the bright future ahead. So looking forward to seeing where the channel goes next. And yeah, we're all along for the ride. So we're here with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
All right. So we have our poll results in. We asked, aside from WatchMojo, what Mojo channel do you watch the most? And 50% said Mojo Plays. Not that I should pat myself on the back too much, because there's a lot of crossover with.
You manipulated the data.
I had nothing to do with it.
I am not surprised. I am really not surprised. I think that makes a ton of sense. It's very representative with, you know, what
there's a lot of cohesion between the WatchMojo crowd and the Mojo Plays crowd, I think. Second place was MsMojo with 38%, so not a small number either. And then 7% Espanol and 3% WatchMojo UK. So yeah, that's that. Let's do a little preview of next week's episode. We're talking about WatchMojo's 2020 plan. What can you say about that?
Well, yeah. So about a decade ago, we were like mid 2010s, and I was like, okay, we've had a really good run now after the early challenging years. So it's all about, you know, iterating, you know, disrupting ourselves, and, you know, coming up with revolutionary ideas. And there was a lot of ideas in-house and from partners. And history rhymes. So a decade later, we're working on WatchMojo 2030, which are like the big initiatives that we're going to be betting on. And that's one reason why I launched like the open-to-work.tv form, Google form, where applicants who are looking for new challenges should be applying. I used to get 10 to 20 emails like that a week. And imagine if I came to you, I was like, hey, Rob, do you mind looking at this guy's resume? You know, it's just benign. It's trying to be helpful. You're like, okay, I view you as a colleague, as a teammate, but from your perspective, you're like, why is my boss asking me to review this? Does he want me to hire this guy? Is this guy going to replace me? So I was just like, it's easier if it all goes in a central place and everybody can access. And then similarly, inside pitch.tv, which we will be launching sooner than I even thought, because there's been a lot of traction for people pitching ideas. So next week we'll dive in. We'll look at reinventing yourself, disrupting yourself, not resting on your laurels. Entrepreneurs, we generally have good intentions, but we do drive people crazy because there's this restlessness inside us, and it's a disease. It's a great thing, but it's you got to be careful. You're never content. Like you have very limited wants. You have very limited needs. You're not in it for materialistic, but you do have these insecurities. You have this fuel fire inside of you. And I admit that I could be a bit annoying in that sense, because I'm very supportive. I'm very patient as well, but I'm also always looking to try things and do things. And I think most people just want to be comfortable and complacent, like as a human nature. So it's hard, it's like everybody understands that you have to take risks and innovate, but to actually get that done, change means you do piss people off, there's friction. And so another theme is always I talk about is force versus finesse. You could come in, and if you want to untie a knot like Alexander the Great, you could take your time to untie it properly. Most people don't have the patience. He didn't. So he took his sword, cut it, and said, this is the way I cut it. No questions asked, right? So we'll make it informative, instructive, and try not to make anybody cry.
Great. Looking forward to that. No tears necessary. So we'll see you back here next week, same time, same place. And until then, take care, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks, Ash.
Thank you. Take care.